Thor Ramsey has been a stand-up comedian for over 3 decades and was featured in 3 Thou Shalt Laugh comedy movies, which sold over 500,000 DVDs and were broadcast on Netflix and cable television. He also wrote the screenplay and starred in the 2021 hit comedy feature film Church People, and he is here with his latest book, The End Times Comedy Show. Not only will it make you laugh out loud, but it tackles some controversial issues, one being the deconstructing faith movement in the evangelical community. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome comedian, author, actor, and screenplay writer, the always funny and thought provoker that he is, Thor Ramsey, to the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Be here.
great to have you back. Well, how did you come up with this amazing idea for this book?
Well, so I started this book in 1997 or 1998, which is why that's where it's set. So I kind of left it where I started it, and I've just worked on it on and off throughout the years. But what prompted it is I wanted to do, this was actually before The Passion of the Christ was released. But I had an idea that originally started as a movie idea, but I wanted to do a movie that really portrayed the crucifixion in all its brutality. But I didn't want to just do a standard crucifixion story. I didn't want to just do one of the gospels. So I was thinking to myself, well, how could you actually show the crucifixion if you weren't doing a gospel? And I thought, well, what if I had somebody who God gave a vision to or a dream to, that found themselves literally being crucified with Christ, as scripture says, we've been crucified with Christ. So I thought, well, let me just explore that. And that kind of just started from that idea. And I thought, well, why would God give someone a dream? Why would they be being, crucified with Christ? You start asking what if, and you start asking all those questions. And 28 years later, you have a novel.
Well, it's kind of funny, not funny, ha ha per se, but to think that if we actually took the place of one of the thieves hanging next to Christ, and
Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
yeah, and knowing that you're looking over, and his cross is probably sitting a little few feet forward than the two behind him, so you get to look at the guy that's technically or is truly dying for your sins, but you're either going to go with him or you're going to be like the other one and you're not.
Yeah, so that's kind of that's the premise is basically it's a stand-up comedian. You write what you know. So it's a stand-up comedian in the secular market who's living in Los Angeles. And I wrote it from my experiences that I had in Los Angeles in the secular market. But I basically put the character in the world of the most influential Christian family in evangelicalism, kind of like Francis Schaeffer. So I basically just made myself part of Francis Schaeffer's family in one respect and just fictionalized them. But so this is the background he comes from, but he's trying to lose his faith is the idea. He wants to lose his faith. He doesn't realize there's actually an underlying bitterness as to why he wants to lose his faith. That comes out later, but that's the idea. He's just out there and he's having trouble shaking the family faith is kind of that's where the satirical element comes in. It's someone who's actually, now this is before the word deconstruction became such, kind of a go-to word, but that's really what he's trying to do in one sense. He's trying to deconvert from his evangelical faith, but the satirical element comes in. He can't shake it. He's just kind of in denial of it.
Well, what I liked is that he is a preacher's kid, which really makes the story extremely believable instead of just having a character that goes, okay, I become a minister, now I don't want to be. But you have a preacher's kid who grew up in it, saw it, sees everything, and especially when your book opened up. I mean, the first chapter is just pure movie gold. I mean, the character in your book, Sam, and as I was reading along, I can literally see either Paul Rudd or Ben Stiller playing that part because knowing the truth, because they're character, they're the type of actor that if you look at most of their movies, they're always trying to find a reason as to where life is leading them, and they mess it up, and it's almost like they come back full circle. But knowing the truth and trying everything in their human power to run away from it, and still finding undeniable truth in the process. Did I get that right?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I would say really this character is really a believer who's trying to be an unbeliever is really the premise because he's not. I didn't want to do a when in multiple drafts it started out as a conversion story, but that you just feel like they're kind of overdone. So you like I didn't want to do a what you call a traditional conversion story. Well, and one of my other feeling is I feel like real conversion stories just you can't fictionalize those. That like when people share their true conversion stories, they're powerful and you cannot capture that same power of the story in a fictionalized account. That's my feeling. So I didn't want to try to do that because I felt like you can't really duplicate that. That's why God has conversion stories because they're so powerful.
Yeah.
So
But, Thor,
go
you know,
ahead.
your book, and ladies and gentlemen, you literally you have to read this book because I call it a work of literary art because it really is.
Well, good.
The book is so well written, and I will promise you this, as I was reading through it, I thought I was actually reading a true story. It's very compelling. And Thor, where did your character development actually come from?
Well, again, the adage is you write what you know, because fiction is basically two things. You take little snippets of your own life because you've experienced it, and then you steal from a lot of other people and never tell them. So that's why a lot of times people will share a story with you, and secretly you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, I'm gonna use that someday in a novel or a screenplay," but you get no credit. I'm just stealing from your life. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a world in a fictional account, whether it's a screenplay or a novel, and you're trying to sell the reality of it. And that's why you use little segments of reality. But in my own experience, I fell away for over a decade. I became a Christian my freshman year of college, walked with Christ for 3 years, got introduced to some really bad theology. I will say that. And so that's really what shipwrecked my faith was bad theology. So I'm really big on theology now. It's like I didn't get, my discipleship that I went through didn't really take me into the depth of the gospel. It just said, do these things. Get up every day, have a quiet time, share the gospel, come with us on spring break to Florida, share the gospel on the beach, to do all these different things, but never really taking me into the depths of the gospel. And so, and once I was doing all those things sincerely, and then I got introduced to some really bad theology, um, it ended up shipwrecking my faith. And so and it was during those years that I began stand-up comedy. And so I didn't consider myself a Christian anymore because I was introduced to a theology that taught you could lose your salvation. So because I wasn't living as a Christian, I wasn't, you know, reading my Bible every day and praying and, witnessing to people. But secretly, I still believed everything in the Bible. I still believed the Bible. I still believed that Christ was the living. I always thought it was the truth. I just believed that I walked away from him and now I wasn't his anymore. And so it was just a really weird state of mind. But that was kind of part of the impetus of the character too.
But
Was,
you have a line and in your book, and I think when you wrote it, it was seared into my brain.
hmm,
And because the line of the book reads, "A bad doctor can kill you, but a bad preacher can damn your soul." And I
right.
sat there, I'm like, oh, wow. And how much of that is going on today? And then here you are telling the story that you had walked away from the faith due to bad theology. And there's a lot of bad theology out there
Yeah.
today, damaging lives.
Yes, yes. Well, and not now. I believe so. In hindsight, I look back on my life and go, I believe I was a true Christian because one of the biblical principles is if you're truly Christ, then even if you backslide horribly, and you can, he'll bring you back. Now, that's just a biblical theological principle. And if you're not Christ, then you can apostatize. You can start denying the basic doctrines of the Christian faith. You deny that Jesus was the Son of God. You'll start denying the primary doctrines that all Christians must confess and must believe in order to be called Christian. Now, I never, did that. Now, I had some bad theology that made me think I could lose my salvation, so I never called the one thing I am thankful for is I never called myself a Christian when I wasn't walking in a way that actually would glorify. I was walking in a way that would dishonor Christ. So when I was doing that, I never said, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian." I never did one of those. Which you meet people like that. I'm like, no, well, like the character in the. Well, I will say this for your listeners: it's whatever they expect of Christian fiction. Don't expect that. This is not your standard. This is probably not your standard. You know, mass market Christian.
But it's real, but like I said, reading the book, I literally thought I was reading a real life true story because that's how well you wrote it, which is great because when people do read this book, they're going to see some things that they're going to be able to relate to. And, my question to you is why are we seeing more people trying to walk away from Christianity by deconversion? Has today's church created a more cynical attitude, or is the attitude more about today's church's delivery of the good news that is lessening the power of Christ?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think we have created an environment of the church where it's more palatable to do those things. But I think part of the deconversion movement is I don't think I don't think it's an intellectual exercise. I think deconversion is emotional. You have someone who has an issue with something and that it's secret to begin with. They're going through the motions. Whether they think they believe, because I feel like if someone truly deconverts, then they're probably not a believer to begin with. But for whatever reason, they're immersed in evangelicalism. They're giving it a shot. They're giving it their best try, but secretly they really struggle with some of the doctrines like I would say, big ones are, well, just looking at humanity, this has never changed, but I think the things they'll struggle with are the sexual morality of Christianity. I think a lot of people struggle with. Like you look at this, like even secular people. I love Jesus. I love his life, his teachings, but the morality of Christianity, I can't stand. And that's what you have people struggling with the issue of same-sex marriage or sex outside of marriage. Really just, the Christian sexual ethic. Now, it might be something else, but I think a lot of it is they'll struggle with some particular issue emotionally. And they just can't emotionally get there. And then because they can't get there emotionally, they start looking for things to justify their emotional state. So the intellectual part comes later, and it's not really a truly intellectual struggle with something within the faith. I believe that they find intellectual arguments that will justify their emotional state so that they can live the way they want to live without, because what happens in life is that when your mind and your heart aren't in sync, then your soul is in turmoil, and people can't live that way. So if you think one way and you're living another, you're all in turmoil. So you got to get your mind and your heart, even on with whether it's self-deception, you got to get them on the same level so that you can then live freely and be without that inner,
Yeah, because a lot of the stories that I read, and I'm talking real people wanting to leave the faith, or they come out, they get their publicists to tell everybody, "Hey, I'm leaving the church. I'm leaving Christianity, and this is why." You got the first part perfect. It's always emotion, and I always wonder, is most of the time with these people who are wanting to deconvert, is it because of them watching? Maybe is it the pastor they're serving? Is it the ministry that they're serving in? And it's not living up to what the word says. So they're looking outward at the human element, of Christianity being served instead of
Yeah.
looking and keeping their eyes on Christ solely and not realizing, hey, we're not perfect. And then they
Well,
think, well, this is there's
yeah. I
nothing.
think it's always a combination of that old, you know, trifecta: the world, the flesh, and the devil.
Yeah.
Um, Certainly, I think there's a lot of, unfortunately, I don't think and I don't want to blame the people who discipled me, but I would do it differently. Like, I handle new Christians in a different way now. I take them, I don't even tell them to do anything. I don't start with what they should do. I start with their belief in Christ, and let's go deeper in who he is, what that means for the world, what that means for us, and just really go into the depth of the gospel, of the good news of his death, of his life, death, and resurrection. That's all part of the gospel. And so I really delve into who God is. That's where I begin, and just really delve there. And it's all, people might think it's too focused on the mind, but I'm going, I've always been the kind of person I need to be convinced in my mind before it gets to my heart. Now, some people are reversed. They just go by their gut instinct, and everyone's a little different, but I still feel like for a really solid walk, you have to have a solid foundation. And that foundation is never our feelings. It's never emotional. That foundation is always the truth of the scriptures and what they teach. That's where our faith comes from. So if we don't teach them, here's why the Bible is reliable, all these different things, then I think later, then when they get influenced, we're always going to be influenced by the world and our own flesh, pulling us different ways. That's just always part of life. And just, the world has won the culture wars in that sense. And so if we continue to look to the world, and it does shape us whether we want it to or not. The world's shaping us. If we have a Netflix account or a Prime, Amazon account, we're watching those movies, and whether we admit it or not, that worldview is seeping in. It's if it's not shaping us, it's certainly, trying to. It's certainly trying to, because every novel, every screenplay, every point of view, every talking head comes with a worldview, and that worldview is either in line with the truth, how God has revealed it, or it is working against it. And there's no neutrality. There is no neutral ground. Neutral ground is a myth. And so that's really what we're struggling with, I think. And if you don't have a solid foundation in Christ, then yeah, you can be, well, it's the biblical, you can be tossed about by every wind of doctrine.
Well,
But
yeah.
that every wind of doctrine is not just bad Christian doctrine, it's bad secular doctrine
Well, yeah.
the
I
world is
mean,
full of.
well, Christ said, "I don't want you to be lukewarm." That's neutral territory. He said, either be hot or either be cold, because he can
Yeah.
work with that. But if you're riding the fence, it's really hard to break through some people's mindsets. And I found it interesting with the way that you created the characters in the book. And you brought up different elements of you just mentioned it a few minutes ago, but the different elements of sex that the church battles with. But in your book, one of your characters says something a bit profound, and I actually just kind of read it over and over again. And the character, ladies and gentlemen, so you have to read the book, Sugar the stripper. So, he said fake lives have side effects, and seems to be true if a Christian isn't sold out totally to Christ. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So that is, yeah. So one of the characters is a stripper. Now, to be fair, I made that part up, folks. That's not part of my life. So, um, well, I never put it this way. Okay, the dating part of the stripper is made up. Okay,
Yeah.
so I can say,
Well, here, Thor, let me help you, because ladies and gentlemen, I read the book, and I will tell you the storyline works perfectly. Uh, for a lot of you who read, it's almost like you'll see the movie literally playing in your head. And Thor, I can see this becoming a motion picture.
well, that's interesting. That's interesting. 'Cause I haven't gotten there yet, because I don't know. How I don't know how we'd make it, but I'm surprised it's a novel. To say the truth. Yeah. Well, I mean, it was published by we would call I guess a boutique publisher. They're really committed just to the content and hopefully something more literary. That was the goal, but other people decide that. So I don't know I heard I heard this once. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that in in the larger Christian fiction world, there's certain subjects you can't even bring up in your novel, which I found absolute. I just I mean I don't know if it's true, but I find, how do you write about real life if you can't write about real people? And how do you write about that in a Christian? Because what I was looking for so I became a Christian my freshman year of college. I had this great English teacher my junior and senior year of high school. She was amazing. And she taught us the base. I remember our junior year, she like did some test with us, and like she said to our whole class, like, you guys still don't know the basics of grammar. We're going to spend this year diagramming sentences. And so we spent the year diagramming sentences. And the next year we had her again, and we spent the year writing essays once we knew the grammar. And so once I started writing essays, she started encouraging me. She goes, you really have a gift for writing. And she just said, fictionalize your essays if you want. And then she started introducing me to different authors that I, would have never come across. But for our final, we could choose our own project. And I chose to write a short story. And so I wrote this short story. I still have the whole short story, but I'm going to frame now the cover, the first page of that short story, because she wrote down the margin in red ink all along down the margin. But one of the things she said in that margin is she said, keep writing, because one day you'll be published. And her name was Mrs. Osborne. And so I always kept that in mind. And so when I entered college, I was an English major and I wanted to become a novelist. I wanted to write. And then long story short, transitioned to stand-up, thinking I would still write while doing stand-up, not realizing that stand-up takes such dedication to get to learn the craft, that I had to put the writing on kind of a back, though I was still writing, but I was learning how to write comedy. And so, and I never regret that, because learning how to actually write comedy and you just really have to learn that craft, that plays a part in everything I write now, from screenplays to novels. And so, but she introduced me to this whole world. So when I became a Christian, I was looking for authors that wrote from a Christian worldview, that wrote like Hemingway or Fitzgerald or J.D. Salinger, the people that I was reading that really influenced me. And all I could find, the only novel I could find back then, was a novel called Christie by Catherine Marshall. And if people don't know Christie, it's what Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman was basically based on, in a loosely uncredited way. but there's a whole long story behind that in Christian, adventures in Christian entertainment, I guess you'd call it. But I couldn't find anyone that wrote from just the contemporary or modern voice. And then I came, and I came across Leif Enger a few years back. Now, Leif Enger, if people haven't read him, now he doesn't publish in the Christian market. He publishes in his book was actually a #1 bestseller, Peace Like a River. And he's an amazing author. He's the author I was looking for all those years ago that I couldn't find. But I heard someone say this once, or I read this, but they said, if you can't find the book you want, write it. And so that's what I tried to do with this novel. I wrote the kind of Christian novel that I'd been looking for, at least from my life, which was dealing with contemporary characters and contemporary issues, but from a Christian worldview. And so that's what I'm trying to write. I actually have 4 other novels in this family line that I'm hoping to publish in the next 3 years is my goal, but we'll see what happens. So I'm just trying to get people to read this one, maybe get the next one published.
But what I loved about it is the dialogue between the characters is so real. I mean, I can literally, when I was reading the dialogue between Sam and Sugar, and I'm like, that is a real, honest conversation. And you could see, where they were each coming from, because you slowly revealed the background intertwined between all the dialogue. And I mean, Thor, seriously, it was perfectly written. I loved it because, ladies and gentlemen, when you read the End Times Comedy Hour, this amazing novel, it doesn't. You don't need a degree in neurology to understand it. Okay, you don't even need to know the difference between Genesis and Revelation. When you read it, you're gonna go, ah, this is great, and you can relate to the characters, even the stripper. It works because with Thor, I could literally see those characters in real life having that conversation. That's why this book is so good. And but you also made a comment that you call Christianity the one religion that doesn't exist without the miraculous. Now, many of my viewers and listeners, they're believers, and there are some that are not. So, explain the why to those that are not.
Well, I mean, Christianity doesn't exist without the resurrection of Christ. This is what the whole religion is based. It's based upon a miracle, you know. Well, it's based upon multiple miracles. You know, he was born of a virgin, miraculous. He was God come to earth in the flesh, miraculous. So if you just go with the premise that you know, we have a creator, which I think is the most rational premise to go with. I just don't understand the mentality, and I actually have a one of my books is called The Honest Atheist, where Sam becomes, the character from this book. This character becomes best friends with the character that becomes the leading atheist author. He's kind of the predecessor to all the new atheists. So again, this is set back on the um, this comes just a little later than the End Times comedy show, but The Honest Atheist set in the early 2000s. So he's a predecessor, but they become, uh, really good friends. And so, but the thing I've never understood is treating atheism like it's rational in any sense whatsoever. I mean, to me, the only rational atheist is a nihilist. If you're an atheist and you can say nothing absolutely matters, then you're at least consistent. But the atheist who has all kinds of moral objections that's the thing. An atheist with moral objections doesn't work in an atheistic worldview. I mean, I'm getting off track here, but
No, I get it because in the end, they're going to believe in something. They can deny the existence of God, but in the end, they're going to have a belief system somewhere. So, does that make them
that's
atheist?
where I started was the most rational belief system is that there's a creator. And then the second most logical thing is if there's a creator, the only way we can know anything about him is if he's revealed himself. And so that's just logical. And so Christianity is just like, hey, he has. And this is who he says he is. Now you can disagree with this, but this is the logical implications of Christianity. And the great argument to me, which is evidence, is if you have a man who claims to be God, then he would influence the world the way Jesus Christ has. He would be the most influential figure who ever lived. If God came to earth in human flesh, he would be the most influential person who ever lived, who ever walked, who ever spoke. And you find that in Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So I think the miraculous is confirmed by the evidence that's wrapped up in it also. But that evidence also is the resurrection. So the resurrection is miraculous. We've been claiming this from day one. We're not claiming a spiritual resurrection. We're claiming he physically rose from the dead. It's miraculous. He's still introducing himself to people now. People still meet him through the miraculous workings of the Holy Spirit in our lives, where he takes residence. God, what's the old book's title? There's a um, uh, the life of God and the soul of man. That's what we find. That's what a Christian is. We have the life of God in the soul, our soul, the life of God in the soul of man, which is also miraculous. So what I did in the book is one of the satirical elements to me is someone who's trying to deny the faith, but keeps encountering the miraculous. So to me, I found that funny. And so what I did then is I took things that people had shared with me. So I would say these are extra biblical. It's like now the miraculous element is biblical. These particular incidents are people had shared throughout their lives, different things that happened to them. And they're like, it's very interesting. And I just kind of, filed them away. And then Some of those I brought out slowly in the novel, just this character again trying to run away from Jesus and just literally being running into the miraculous all over the place. Now, some of it I fictionalized, of course, and some of it I used for uh, almost and almost like a parable in one sense. I took the idea of being crucified with Christ and made that somewhat of a parable throughout the novel, but in a very subtle way, because I think that's the whole thing. You're trying to sell a reality. So the satirical and parabolic, would that be the word? Elements have to be subtle. So that's what I tried to do.
So when people read your book, what do you hope they get from it?
Well, um, I hope they get the idea that you can do other things with Christian fiction. That's what I truly hope, because I didn't, I never began as someone who's trying to do films and novels. I think the mistake that the church has made with the arts is trying to use arts as a tool for messages. And I feel like, all right, if we take a biblical look at creation itself, now the heavens do declare the glory of God, but they don't preach us the gospel. You can't get the gospel from looking at creation. You can get some idea of who the creator is, but you can't actually get the gospel itself. So the creation is there so that we'll seek the creator and how he's revealed himself. Now, I feel like that's what good art does. Art shouldn't be a sermon in disguise. That's my feeling. You begin with a story. You begin with some sort of compelling idea or compelling story. And that's what I always begin with. You have to begin with the story. And that's what you're trying to tell. You're trying to tell a compelling story that interests people. I'm just trying to tell it from a worldview that assumes Christianity is true. And that's the difference. I mean, a secular author is trying to do the same thing. They're trying to tell a compelling story, but often they tell that story in a worldview that assumes Christianity isn't true. So they have a different worldview, and every story comes with a worldview, as I mentioned before. And so I'm just trying to do it. And what's interesting is, even if you read Hemingway, and Hemingway was a lapsed Catholic, and yet he still had this respect. Now, I don't believe Hemingway's I'm making an evaluation here. Hemingway was not a born again believer by any stretch of the imagination. I think he would even say, no, I wasn't. But he did have a respect for the Christian view of the world. And I think you even find it, like somebody said this, that the West is Christ haunted, that we can't get away from the reality of the Christian worldview in one sense, and who Jesus is and how he's influenced our worldview and the lives we live, even if we deny him. And so I think you find that in a lot of novelists. You find that their novels are Christ haunted in the sense that they are still writing from an assumption that Christianity may be the truth. So I think you find that in a lot of the novels of people from different generations. Now, again, some people write from a different worldview, but all I'm saying is that the Christian who believes the Bible should just do their art from a worldview that assumes this is true, and that informs the worldview. It informs the characters, informs the story, it informs everything. Now, it doesn't have to preach. So when people read it, they can just go, I wonder if, maybe that the way creation does make them seek the creator. That's the idea. So, because I think we do a disservice to what God means for art when we try to make it well, let's put it this way, folks. We're living in an age where you can watch Netflix, Prime Video, or anything else, and you're inundated with their particular gospel. Every television show has this particular false worldview that they're shoving down our throats, and we say it like that because we resent that they're shoving it down our throats, and they are.
Yeah, well, that brings me to another point. Tell me about the protest show.
Oh, well, the protest show. Well, the protest show is the way to me, that's my pushback. I normally don't do political comedy, but and the protest show is not endeavor that is financially benefiting me in any way whatsoever. It is truly just came from, I used to be one of these people. Let's say 4 or 5 years ago, I was of the mindset that a preacher should never talk about politics from the pulpit. That was my point of view. It was like, you shouldn't do it. It does in the long run, it doesn't matter. Blah, blah, blue, blah, blah, blah. And some people still subscribe to that particular naive point of view, I think. But today it is politics itself. Now, I've always believed our faith informs our politics. I've always believed that. But I believe now that more than ever, politics is a worldview divide.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean everyone who's conservative is Christian, but between the left and the right, there is a demarcation. There is a worldview divide. And I think it's incumbent now upon preachers to, when it comes up in scripture, to address these things head on. And I think we're in the state we're in now because we haven't addressed these things head on. Too many preachers have been afraid to talk about the evils of abortion. Too many preachers have been afraid to talk about Romans 1 and just state there's only one reality for sexual relationships, and that's between a man and a woman in marriage, the way God has instituted it and ordained it.
Yeah.
And I think too many preachers are just afraid to speak the simple truths because of the way they're perceived now. Now I feel like we should have been doing this all along.
Yeah.
Now again, we want to do it in
Politically
probably not as harshly as I stated it there, but
Yeah.
we want to still speak the truth clearly, pointedly, and lovingly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we need to do. Now, the protest show came from my just going, I can't believe this last election. I can't believe it. I can't believe what's happening with journalism today.
Yeah.
And the media.
There is
It's astounding. Because
Yeah.
I grew up in a Democratic home that I could say these folks were classic liberal in the sense that they said you should be open-minded and hear both sides of the story. You should walk in another person's shoes. It was kind of the Atticus Finch view of politics in one sense. And that always stuck with me that, it wasn't like my parents weren't ideologues. They were working class people, which is, why they were with the Democrats back then. But that's all changed. I mean, the Democrats are certainly not the party of the working class individual anymore. That is mythical, which is why it's so interesting that so many, of the poor working class would even associate with the Democratic Party. It's just now that there's this narrative about the mean Republicans and the white nationalism, and it's just all narrative. It's just you're being fed a story and you're buying that story. And to me, the protest show is a way to push back in true peaceful protest and combat some of this ridiculous thinking because we're living in satirical times. So I get together with a friend of mine, Ron McGee, and we write the show, and we probably spend a couple hours writing it and about an hour recording it, and there's the show.
Yeah, we just think what's going on in today's world gives you so much to write about, so much ammunition, and technically it should be a comedy feeding frenzy, but a lot of comedians won't touch it because it's too hot due to so many groups becoming very militant in their attitude.
Right.
I love, again, your book, The End Times Comedy Hour, because the storyline is so real, it's so relatable, and I like the fact that you write it from a worldview because too much of the church continues to talk to the choir. They don't talk to the harvest that is there to be reaped that Christ told us about. Workers are few, the harvest is there. Go get it. And your book reaches those people that need, well, in a way, I look at your book as a different ministry tool in a very peculiar way.
Well, I think it's like if somebody reads it and they get, because we do mention some things like I mention other sources in the book that they could go to and truly find the gospel, such as the book of Galatians. It's like the Bible. So that book comes up. Now we don't expound upon it, but then I bring up Martin Lloyd-Jones, I think, at several points. And so there's people mentioned in the novel that if it piques their interest, they can certainly go to those sources, and they're great sources. I would say, the book of Galatians, Bible, number one, and right behind that, Martin Lloyd-Jones, the greatest preacher of the last century, probably.
Well, where can all of my viewers and my listeners get your brand new book, The End Times Comedy Show?
Yeah, so yeah, you can get on Amazon right now. I would say wherever books are sold, but I don't know right now if it's what bookstores it would be in, but Amazon's your best bet. I mean, I still have to go with Amazon in terms of you can get a hardback version or the paperback or the Kindle version is the least expensive. I don't know if it's the I don't know if it's the recession, but the price is the paperback and the hardback are a little pricey. I didn't set the price; the publisher set the price, but the Kindle's reasonable, so you can get the Kindle version and read that. But yeah, I would just encourage people to go to Amazon, just put in the End Times Comedy Show, and it should pop up, and they'll see the cover. It's got it's a cover. It's a, it's really the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It's a shot of the Hollywood Walk of Fame.
Well, I can tell you one thing, you may end up with your own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame by writing books like this. And again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not seen Thor Ramsey on screen, I'm going to do a quick little picture. You've got to see the film. Church people, you will literally laugh out loud. Hopefully, you will even laugh at yourself because it is one of the best Christian comedies out there. And again, get the book, ladies and gentlemen. If you love to read like I do, but you really want to read something, well, like I said, it's a literary work of art because of the way Thor wrote the book, the character development, everything about this book is absolutely spot on. So again, just like Thor said, head over to Amazon and look up and buy the End Times Comedy Show book by Thor Ramsey. Thor, it's always an absolute pleasure to have you on the program.
Thank you again. And if they buy it and like it, write a review. That's really helpful.
That's right. So I got to get on there as well to write the 5-star review.
Oh, I appreciate that so much.
You bet. So, ladies and gentlemen, Thor Ramsey, the End Times Comedy Show book, the novel. You will love it. I can absolutely guarantee that because I fell in love with the book, and I will be shouting it from the rooftops. And again, thank you for being on the program.
Thanks again for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, stick around because I will be right back with more.